So in this series, I try to put some light on places where there might be some darkness. I try to highlight some unsung heroes. We musicians, we know our legacy. We know where this music comes from. We know who the pioneers were. We know who the innovators were. We know who the creators were. We know who the outstanding musicians were. But the larger public may not, because a lot of what happens is about popularity and record sales and publicity and this and that. But for musicians, it's about the music. So we're going to talk about Bud Powell. Because when we talk about bebop, we talk about Thelonious Monk, we talk about this, we talk about Bird. But we rarely talk about Bud Powell, who may have been one of the baddest cats on the scene. Matter of fact, no way about it. Was, period. There were people who say he was the Bird of the piano. What does that mean? Bird could play quick, fast, technically unbelievable licks to perfection. So could Bud Powell. Now, why is that? Well, his father was a stride pianist who discovered that his son had talent. And rather than teaching his son, he decided to turn him over to a more well-trained pianist who was also well-steeped in classical music, so he could help him develop extraordinary technique and control. That's a very wise move on that father's part. By 5, little Bud's playing his butt off. He has an older brother named William, who was a trumpet player. And William had his own band. By 15, Bud is playing piano with his older brother. And I mean playing. As Bud was born and raised in Harlem, all around him was swing, baby. It was swing, it was jazz, everywhere. And he had a chance encounter with none other than Thelonious Monk. And they were kind of kindred spirits, trying to create a wider envelope for this music. More experimentation, broaden the scope of what we do melodically and harmonically and rhythmically in this music. Now, Bud's playing little standard gigs, big band gigs, Cootie Williams and things like that. But Bird heard him and went, oh yeah. And Diz heard him and went, oh yeah. And they both heard him because Monk brought him to Benton's Playhouse, which is where all the cats hung out to play. And Monk became his mentor. As a matter of fact, one of Monk's most outstanding compositions is called In Walked Bud. Because when Bud walked in, stuff happened. Oh yeah, stuff happened. Monk was everywhere. And of course, living there in New York, it wasn't long before Bud and Monk bumped into each other. Bud was doing more traditional swing kind of thing, and Monk was starting his explorations and had recently become the kind of a house pianist at Minton's. Pretty soon, Bud is being introduced to Dizzy and Bird and cats like that at Minton's, and finds out that this is the path he wants to go. And so bebop got another great visionary. And since Bud's training at an early age was classical and very technical, and he was well steeped in classical harmony, and he could read, his sight reading was just incredible. he was a complete musician. He was able to take this music even further and faster than most of his contemporaries. So when Monk wrote the piece, In Walked Bud, it's really a testament to just how incredible the presence of Bud Powell was on the scene and on the music. Now, Bud had gigs just about everywhere, and he was pretty much playing with Cootie Williams' big band most of the time. Near the end of that situation, he played a gig in Philadelphia, and it was the last night, and he was feeling pretty good and decided to take a walk down Broad Street and ran into two security guards from the railroad area there. And they decided that they would they'd beat him up. Yeah, they would beat him up. Thank God they didn't shoot him. Today he probably would have got shot. But in those days they just beat you up. But they put a beating on him that hospitalized him and left him with headaches, and not soon after he was hospitalized at Bellevue and then sent to a state mental ward for 2.5, 3 months. And that beating was the beginning of his descent into mental illness and alcoholism. I'll let you digest that for just a minute. However, even in the middle of all that, Bud is still doing recordings and gigs with Sonny Rollins and Sonny Stitt and J.J. Johnson and Charlie Mingus and Art Blakey and Buddy Rich and Ray Brown and anybody that was a who's who in jazz. They wanted Bud around. Because even though he had started having these problems as a result of that extreme beating, he was still a genius and an awesome pianist and an awesome creative force. Many of you know, some of you don't know, that Bud had a younger brother named Richie, who was also a pianist. Richie Powell played with the great Clifford Brown. And Richie was killed in the same car accident that took the life of Clifford Brown. This was another great tragedy for Bud Powell. He continued to play for a while, but like a lot of musicians, jazz musicians, they got to travel abroad. Let's just say the social climate, the racial climate in America was not pleasing to him. And so he left with a female he had met after a gig in 1956 and 1959. They left and they moved to Paris and set up shop in the Hotel La Louisiana. Her name was Buttercup. And if you've ever seen the movie with Dexter Gordon, around about midnight, you'll see there's a character in there named Buttercup who's taking care of all the musicians. Well, Buttercup took care of Bud Powell for the entire time that they were in Paris. She took care of his gigs, took care of his money, took care of his medications, everything. But then he decided he had a gig, he wanted to play, he wanted to come back home. Everybody gets homesick. So he comes back to play a gig in New York. And he stays here just a little bit too long. And he turned to alcohol and ended up contracting tuberculosis because he was not taking care of himself. He didn't have Buttercup with him to mind his health and his finances and whatnot. And so he died at the age of 41. So sometimes America eats its young. And Bud Powell is one of those sensitive geniuses that was devoured by some systemic problems we have in this country. Yet, his compositions, Un Poco Loco, so many others, Dance of the Infidels, his playing, his recordings, his influence on all the musicians who came in contact with him, even down to people like Chick Corea, who would tell you that Bud Powell is one of his main influences. Matter of fact, Chick made a recording, entire recording, dedicated to Bud Powell. So the general man may not know who Bud Powell was, but we musicians who live this music, we know, and we mourn the loss of this great and tender genius due to some issues that were just systemic in American society. And it all started, this descent all started with a severe beating after a gig late one night as he walked on Broad Street in Philadelphia. So it's not a happy story, his life, but go listen to his music. And I guarantee you that through it all, you can hear the joy, you can feel the joy that was in Bud Powell's heart and soul. And you can hear the genius that was in his mind, and you can hear the awesome technical ability, facility, speed, control that was in his hands. Thank you very much.